Okay, we are going to get started. I am so thankful that each of our wonderful panel presenters are on here tonight. We have the amazing Deidre Bradley, the incredible Carvel Montgomery, the wonderful Alyssa Weber. That was hard for me to say. I've known her for my whole life as Alyssa Newmeyer, so I almost said the wrong thing. The wonderful Shantae Gilmore, Kyan Mitchner, and we are all very excited to just share a discussion this evening. We know that many times educators start looking ahead at their pacing guide and they start looking ahead at what's on the calendar. And I know especially in elementary education, sometimes we go toward those holidays and want to spend a lot of time talking about them because we know we want school to be fun for our students. But I always am interested around this time of year whenever we start seeing Martin Luther King Jr. Day coming up on the calendar. And I know that I've seen things that have looked as small as Martin Luther King Jr.'s face being up in the corner of a math worksheet to as extensive as having incredible assemblies where the whole school is gathered together talking and sharing with amazing speakers. So I just want to talk, what could Martin Luther King Day look like in the classroom, and hear experiences and expertise from our panel members tonight. So we're going to go ahead and get started with our first kind of guiding point here. So I would just want to open it up first. We all were a student at one time in our lives. I am just super curious to hear about experiences that any of you all had growing up in the classroom as a student. Something that you remember from learning about Martin Luther King in your classroom, whether that's a positive, a negative, or just the fact that you remember not learning about it in your classroom if your teacher chose to omit that. I just want to open it up. Anyone who wants to share?
Okay, well, I will go ahead and start that off. I'm probably the oldest one on here, but I'm not going to tell you how old I am. So, but when I read that question, because I'd never thought about that, and I began to ponder, wow, when did I learn, in school about Dr. King? And I remember I didn't learn anything in elementary. I remember I didn't learn anything in middle school. And it wasn't until I went to high school where we started having discussions. And I think that was only because I was fortunate enough to be in a school that had Clara Luper as my teacher. For those who know, Miss Luper was a civil rights activist that marched with Dr. King, and we're fortunate to have her in Oklahoma. Led lots of sit-ins in Oklahoma. So that's where my experience began, was with Clara Luper, and that's where my experience began, even starting to learn about African American history. And then after that, when I left, then that was the end of those discussions, because now you're in college, and unless you intentionally take some classes on African American history and a lot of, and unless you went to a historically Black college, a lot of those classes were, very limited, and so it was kind of sad when I read that question, like, wow, I didn't learn about that until I went to high school. And it was only because I had a teacher, hence the importance of teachers being here tonight, because I had a teacher that was intentional of making sure that not just African American kids knew the history, but that all kids learned the history and how important it is for us. So that's my spiel and my experience on learning about Dr. King.
I think that really is important. It's not just for our African American students to learn, it's for everyone to learn so that we can move forward in the right direction together. I love that. It's so powerful that Clara Luper was one of your teachers.
Yes.
I did my 8th grade history day project on Clara Luper in the sit-ins in Tulsa and was so inspired by
Mhm.
her. That's really, really neat. Does anyone else have a experience from growing up in the classroom?
Yeah, I'm with her. I don't really have a strong recollection of what we talked about or what we learned about in class during Black History Month or around Martin Luther King, but I can recall going home one day from elementary school and speaking to my cousins about skin color specifically. Now, I don't know what exactly prompted me to bring this up, but a lot of my family have a much lighter skin tone than I do, and I had mentioned it to one of my cousins, and I said, my skin's a little bit darker and your skin's a little bit lighter. But that was the first time that I can remember that I noticed an actual difference in the tones. And I attended a public school. I mean, I didn't go to a private school. I was in a regular, neighborhood. I wouldn't consider myself below poverty. But I can tell you a lot of the students in my class were not African American. I was maybe one of two or three in my class at elementary school, even middle school and high school, that were African American. So I noticed it, but when I brought it up to my mom's attention, she's like, no, that has nothing to do with anything. So I think I was fortunate enough to have educated people around me to set me straight very early on. But yeah, I don't remember any strong lessons specifically on Martin Luther King or African Americans or ethnicities or culture at all.
That's really interesting, Cayenne. I hope that we can inspire some educators that may see this to take the time to learn themselves so they can have really strong conversations and maybe make that a part of elementary school and middle school and high school for students that they have an impact on right now. All right, I just want to check if anyone else wanted to share on that topic before I move on.
I would like to speak on that. I was actually thinking back when I first learned about Martin Luther King, and I really couldn't think about it until the other two young ladies were talking, and then it dawned on me when I first heard about Martin Luther King, and that's when I lived in Texas in elementary school. They had hyped it up so much as far as who Martin Luther King was, and I was so inspired by his message and seeing in the history books of what he did and what he the mark that he made in the community. And we had did during Black History Month, we had did a assembly. Everybody was involved in the assembly, all the students. And I was one of the people that memorized the I Have a Dream speech verbatim. And it was me and this other boy that were going head to head with presenting at the assembly. And I wound up not able to do it because I was a girl, because they wanted a man or a male boy to actually give the speech compared to a female. I was the African American female, and this is a white male that was going to give the speech. And so I was like, during Black History Month, don't you think? And I actually said this. I said, don't you think an African American girl should be able to give the I Have a Dream speech? And I still didn't get it. And so I was devastated because, like I said, I was so inspired and memorized it. Like, you're like what, in third or fourth or fifth grade? I don't remember the exact age group I was in, but I was in elementary school memorizing I Have a Dream speech, and then you're told no because you're a girl, you can't do it.
Wow.
So that kind of projected me into my future of you can't tell me no now. So
you could not tell Shantae no.
I know that's right.
I really appreciate you sharing that memory, and I bet that really was difficult for you as a student. Yeah. Looking ahead.
I'll just share really quickly.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So I went to a school that was predominantly white, and so I could you could count on one hand how many students look like me in the entire school, right? And that was from K through 8th grade. So each year for Black History Month, it's kind of sad because it was touched on, but we didn't go in depth, right? I remember we maybe have a couple of assignments around the speech and maybe drafting our own version of the speech and reciting that in front of the class, but it was never. It felt like something that we took off the shelf, discussed for a month, and then put it back on the shelf and kept it moving. So it's just sad, and hopefully, as things progress, it will start to be intertwined throughout history rather than feeling it's something we take off the shelf and then put it back on the shelf once we're done with it.
Absolutely. Carvel's from Pauls Valley. Did you go to elementary school in Pauls Valley as well?
Yes, I went to I didn't go to the public school in Pauls Valley until I got to junior high age,
Okay.
But if any of you are familiar with a school called Whitebead, that's where I attended from K through 8.
I agree with you. I hope that we can start to see this as more of a constant conversation that we're having, and just that education on all these topics is happening for people year round. I think that's going to be really important. My next kind of guiding topic for us was a quote that I heard in a podcast from The New EDU by Hope and Wade King. It said, "When kids are old enough to experience racism, it's time to talk about it." I just kind of want to let that quote sit out there for a second. I just want to hear your input on it. So there's lots of events happening this year. It's in the media. We're hearing more people having conversations about it. We're seeing it in social media. I just want to know what those conversations look like in the classroom to you all. I want to know what parts of this we talk about, what language that we want to use. I'm going to leave it at that, just with let's kind of just talk about that quote. I think another piece of it is when kids are old enough to experience race or to notice race, as Cayenne had said, like she just noticed that her skin was darker than her cousins. And so then she asked about it. I just think at what age or at what does that look like in classrooms to talk with students about race or racism?
I'll speak on that first. I want to first prelude that I am not an educator. I'm a community leader, but not an educator. So I'm just giving my honest thought on the question firsthand. I know the question was when a child experiences racism. Can you repeat the question one more time? Let me go back.
Absolutely. The quote that was in the podcast said, "When kids are old enough to experience racism, it's time to talk about it."
Okay. I personally feel that as adults, we should always be exposing kids prior to them experiencing anything. Granted, I do not have any kids. I am not an educator, but just thinking in hindsight of if I have a kid or if I am mentoring a kid, I would like to expose them to different communities, marginalized communities, social justice issues, so they can know, not to be judgmental, to have acceptance, to have love. So even though they may experience it, I think there should already be a conversation beforehand, and that you're exposing and guiding them through a thought process for love and acceptance. So that's just my take on it. Now, the other questions as far as in the classroom and everything, I'll leave that to the educators.
Well, I'd like to touch a little bit on that. I totally agree with Shantae on that. Right, Shantae, is that right? I don't want to say your name wrong. We don't wait because when I read that quote and you're saying, and if whoever it came from, that we should wait till we experience it to talk about it. When there are a lot of people that are not of color, they are not going to experience racism because they are not of color. So then they will never talk about it because I'm not going to experience that. So we shouldn't wait because we know it exists. It is just like, I look at it like a fire drill. I have never in my life been in a fire, nor have I been in a tornado. But we talk about fire in my home, at school, because in case you are ever in a fire, you will know what to do. In case you are ever in a tornado, you will know what to do. And so it is the same. I look at it with our students. We know racism exists. And if we're still having this conversation, trying to convince people that it exists, then there's another conversation we need to have. But it does exist, and we cannot wait till it is experienced to talk about it. But we have to talk about it ahead of time so that our students, or if we're talking about our students, know it when they see it, so that we can empower our students to speak up when they see it, so that our students who are not of color, when they see it, they can speak up and say, we don't do that here. Some of the things we do at my school, when we talk about bullying and different things, we don't wait till somebody is bullied and then we talk about it. We talk about it so when they see it, they know it, and they're empowered to speak up, to where our students already know. We don't do that at Shedeck Elementary. We don't do that here. And so I'm very hopeful that as educators, we can train our students to respond the same way when they see something that is not right. Hey, we don't do that in our school. We don't do that in our family. So that as they get older, we don't do that in my business. That is not acceptable. And I just feel like until we get there to have these discussions and say, this is not acceptable, It's not acceptable in our country. It's not acceptable in my family. It's not acceptable in my community. And we have to start getting comfortable saying that and having these discussions. So on the quote, no, we can't afford to wait to talk about racism until you experience it.
I really
I agree. Sorry, Emily.
I was
There's
just
a fire in me. And go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I really appreciate you kind of debunking that. I feel like the quote came from a good place, someone wanting to say like we need to be talking about it. But I really appreciate that you have broken that apart for us to understand even deeper than what that quote meant, how important our responsibility is to be, like Shantae and Deidre both said, exposing students to marginalized cultures and to help them understand what racism and like hate speech and things like that look like, so that we can stand up for each other and so that we can say there's no place for that here in our community or in our school. I really appreciate you kind of breaking that quote apart. Kyan, sorry, I want to pass it back to you.
No worries. I was just going to say I agree with Shantae and Deidre 100%. I mean, at the point that we're at now, we've waited until the topic has come up. And at this point, it isn't about us teaching. We're reverting whatever negative or unsure or offset views, perceptions, and topics that have been implemented into these children's lives. We're trying to take that out and change it when it's already in there. Whereas if we were to start at the beginning, which it may look different for every child. I wasn't educated for 10 years and I now still work in education. I just don't work in the classroom. And I still have those conversations with teachers. Whenever there's something brought up in the classroom, make it a whole classroom topic. I mean, when I used to work in early childhood, I had a 3-year-old ask me in a 3-year-old language, Miss Cayenne, why is your skin brown? Okay, that is a perfect opportunity at a 3-year-old to explain to them why my skin is brown and how lucky we are as Americans to be in a place where we can experience different cultures, different ethnicities, different backgrounds, different traditions, all in one country. You have that option, you have that opportunity. It's not a curse, it's not negative. You're going to come across a bunch of different types of people, and here's how you address it as such, instead of going backwards and going, well, so and so said this about me. Well, now you have to start from scratch, but they still have that negative piece in their mind, where if they have positive pieces in their mind, they could say, whoa, that doesn't align with what I've heard over here, what I've learned over here in school in a collective manner from my teacher whom I trust. So yes, I agree.
I kind of want to bounce off of what you were saying. My son is 3 and he goes to pre-K, and he, from a very, very early age, understood that he was a different color than I am. He told me, you match the bottom of my feet. I'm like, you're right. And one day I was picking him up and I was kind of like hanging around, and one of his friends I heard ask Ezra, well, why are you brown and your mommy's white? And me and my husband talk freely about race. I mean, my husband is Black and Japanese, so our family is very diverse, the right word. And and he answered his friend, he said, well, I look like my daddy and my mommy says I'm perfect. And kind of what you were going off of, that was a perfect opportunity to me, to talk to his friend. We all look different and that is totally okay. And just hearing what you guys are saying is so good, because it's such like a comforting feeling that I can build my son up as much as I can at home, and I can send him off, and who knows what is going to be said to him in the future. And I hope and I pray that he handles it just like he did at the age 3. But knowing that there's, educators that are going to educate his friends also, and that is a way of building my son up. And that is so comforting to know that, you're here and you're doing this and people hear you, and it's just amazing.
Looking at our next guiding topic here, I felt silly typing this out, but the phrase that I typed here was MLK Day / Black History Month do's and don'ts. The word do's and don'ts feels very silly and like just it doesn't match the tone of what we're talking about here. But I really do know that there are things that I have learned throughout my my teacher education or even time in the classroom or just getting to learn through programs like NLC. I've gotten to experience a lot of things that people said that were hurtful to them when they were younger that happened in their classrooms, or things that I've been told are empowering to people of color, and I want to be a part of that. So when I talk about do's and don'ts, for just one example, I remember someone saying to me in my teacher prep courses at OSU that never to single out a student of color, making them speak for their whole race, and how important that is, that they should not be representing an entire race for their classroom or being the token in the classroom. And I really want that to be something that we know. So I know there are more of these wonderful things that you all may have to share with us, of things that we should be doing surrounding topics that we're talking about tonight, or things that we should be not doing as far as inciting incidences that may cause trauma for a student. We want to stay away from things like that. So I just want to open that up to you all to give your do's and don'ts, if you will.
I'm going to speak on that too. It's quite interesting that you said that you learned that at OSU. And at OSU was the first time when I was in class. And I was actually singled out to be the person to talk on behalf of the Black race for my history class. And so I was just like, quite ironic that they taught that at OSU, but that actually happened to me at OSU. So that would be definitely something that I feel is very strong, because I've actually had that personal experience as we were learning about African American history at OSU, and the perspective of African American women and things like that. And because I was the only African American woman in my class, I guess we got to speak about it and was singled out in front of everybody in class and was like, well, I don't know, type of thing. Like, I don't know what everybody's thinking as far as my whole race and a whole gender. So that was a very unique and interesting experience as a young college student. But that would be definitely something that I'm going to piggyback off what you said, is don't single out a race to represent the entire race. So most definitely.
I could say something. Obviously, I'm not an educator, right? But I think it's important to, and this is maybe a deeper conversation really than a teacher can handle in their one classroom. But we got to find ways to intertwine Black history into American history and normalize it to where it's not something that we think is a shiny object that we play with for 1 month and then put away, like I mentioned earlier, right? Because since the beginning of this country, there have been people of all sorts of different races and backgrounds that have helped build this country to what it is today. So if we are talking about MLK, it doesn't matter if you're Black or white, that's somebody that we all should look up to for what he did for our country, correct? So I think a do is to try to find, as a teacher, is to maybe try to find ways to intertwine it throughout the whole course of the year that you're teaching history. A don't, obviously, yes, you don't want to find ways to single out any kids. And I also feel like you don't want to necessarily desensitize kids to what really occurred, especially throughout like civil rights and antebellum era and everything like that, because it's important that they get the message that stuff was wrong, not something that they did back then, but now we don't do it anymore, right? Everything's fine now, because this world is obviously still broken and we still have a long way to go, but it's important that they know that we're still facing those issues today. And if you can find ways to maybe relate it to issues that we see today, that's even better too.
And I just like to piggyback off of what he was saying. And as an educator, he's right. We cannot wait until Black History Month, Dr. Martin Luther King Day, to pull out this wonderful history and say, okay, we're going to learn about Dr. King today. That should not be the first time that any student hears about this rich culture. And I believe someone else had mentioned that about how rich our culture is, and we are in a country where we have diverse cultures. I mean, diverse ethnicity groups where we are rich in culture, where we could learn so much about so many different cultures, and we are the only nation that is like that. And so it's truly a blessing. And so I would definitely say that don't wait for one time out of the year to celebrate history. Don't wait and just use one person to recognize. There are so many people to recognize that you could piggyback off of Dr. King, all of the people connected to Dr. King. We have our own Senator Lewis, who had passed away recently. I mean, there are so many people and so many people we can recognize to celebrate this great culture that we have. And like I said, find ways to intermingle the history. I mean, I have a teacher who will find ways to intermingle it with math. I mean, our history didn't start when we came over on the boats. We had a history before we came to America, and we were building pyramids. I mean, we were doing math. I mean, we were doing some amazing things, and we have to find ways to bring that history over and teach our children, because we'll notice that a lot of the issues that our African-American students are facing is because they don't have a connection with our country. Our connection is this, when we talk about history, they're going to bring up slavery. It's like, that's where it starts. I mean, who wants to like, that's where my history starts? No, your history starts further back. But this is what has happened along the way. And so another I would say for teachers is do your research. Research, ask questions. Reach out to other educators, because it's out there, and we just have to be the ones to go and get it. We have to be intentional to do it. And I want to commend you, Emily, for creating this platform, that you were intentional in doing that, because you recognize that, wow, this is something we shouldn't just be doing once a month, but how can we, start putting history in everything that we're doing, and not just this one time. So thank you for doing that.
Thank you. Before I move on, I just wanted to have, if anyone else wanted to share on that. I really appreciate those do's and don'ts. I do have one question on that topic for you all. I felt as an educator before that I didn't have some of the answers to questions that my students were asking me, or it got to a point where I felt like it was beyond classroom conversation, but I knew how important it was for them to be receiving these answers. And so I would go home and do my research that night, but I also would call parents and say, I just wanted to let you know we had this incredible conversation today and your student had the best questions. I wanted to make sure that you all knew that this conversation had started so that you all could continue it, whether the child was white or of any color in our classroom. It was sometimes I just had to let the parents know we started this conversation and I want you guys to be able to continue it at home. How do you guys feel about that kind of thing? And it will not hurt my feelings no matter what you say. I just know that there were times that I didn't know how to answer the questions correctly, and I wanted their parents to be involved in carrying that and continuing it forward.
I would just say that, I'm a soon to be parent, and, if you were my child's teacher and you did that, I would respect it. I feel like, teachers are community leaders, whether they want to be or not, and your job is very important because you're helping shape the youth. And so to me, I think parents and teachers should have those sort of relationships where, you can have those conversations and you can share what, the children are learning in that classroom, and help the parents understand what the kids are talking about at school so that they can help facilitate those conversations at home as well.
I appreciate that insight. I just know sometimes we prepare our lesson plans and then our students are so passionate about a topic that they take it beyond the point that we had prepared for. And so I was just curious about that extension outside of the classroom And like we said, always doing the research to continue having those conversations in the classroom. Our next kind of guiding point, and Deidre kind of touched on this just a moment ago. I saw a lot of this on my own social media this summer. It was interesting to me because I had never thought of this before, but I remember seeing a kind of quote on Facebook, and it was a lady that was very passionate about it. She said, "Do your own research. Do not make your Black friend do the work for you. Do not make your Black friend be your research." And I thought that was really interesting because I think a lot of times we go to experts for our information. I know that whenever I'm doing something new in cooking, I call my mom because she's the one that will be able to tell me the thing I'm looking for. Whenever I'm learning about community outreach, I go to people like Shantae in my life because I know that they have the resources that I need. But this is a different kind of thing where our Black friend doesn't get to be our resource all the time because that's putting a burden on them at times. Can you guys kind of speak to that a little bit?
I'm gonna speak on that too. So, as you know, like Emily said, I do a lot of things in the community, and am a community leader here, and always fighting the fight, trying to make sure everybody has an equal seat at the table. And at the end of the day, when I come home, I'm tired. Like I just want to rest my brain and my body, and just be on Facebook for a second and not have to deal with anything external just for a moment. And I understand, like sometimes your friends do need that education, and they need that authentic, sincere, no judgment conversation with you because they feel that you're the safe space. But then you're still pulling on your friend. And sometimes we just need a moment of just to step back and not deal with reality because we're tired, you know, especially being a Black woman here in America. I mean, we never rest. We take care of everybody, our whole community, and we never rest. And so when we do have a moment, we just want to have our moment. And so if you're pulling on us all the time, and we're out there doing what we got to do, take care of our family, work full time, out there fighting social justice issues, things like that. Like you come with information and then ask us, but don't have us have to give you the information because we're tired. I know I'm always tired. So
I really
but
appreciate that insight, Shantae, of saying come to us with information and ask, but don't make us give you the information. I really appreciate you saying that.
Just to add on, amen, Miss Shantae, yes, you're right. I'm tired. I'm tired of, having to, well, what should I do? And, all of these questions and having to, well, read this book, do this, listen to this podcast, listen to this person. And I get it. And I appreciate that. But, but I also appreciate when you bring me some things. I have a couple of my administrator friends that I'm really close with, and they are not African American, and they will bring things to me that I didn't know. Hey, Miss Bradley, I know we were talking and you had some concerns about your daughter and how she was feeling. I came across this, what was it that she brought me to? This workshop that they're doing, and it's free, and you might check it out. It might work for you and your girls. And it did. And I was surprised that she knew about it. And then I was like, wow, that meant a lot to me. And it was good. It was a great workshop that we attended. And so she did some research and was looking up some things and brought me some things. And so I appreciate that because it made me feel like I'm not by myself, that you're just as concerned about social issues as I'm concerned. And it opened up my eyes to realize, okay, I'm not in this fight alone. I do have some people who are concerned and want to do their part. So I appreciate that. And so, yes, do your research. It's nothing wrong with asking questions, but, but I'm like, Shantae, just give me a moment and then we can talk about it.
Hey, Emily, something that I would share too with helping people kind of find resources is I came across the website. It's called tryingtogether.org. And it just has a bunch of different resources around having race conversations, and anybody's welcome to obviously look at that and figure out what can help them. But yeah, it's one of those things where, the person that's enduring the racism and the issues, we shouldn't have to find the solution for you to be able to get out of that. right? So it's definitely helpful whenever you can bring something to the table too, and we can have a conversation around these things and how do we fix it, rather than the person that didn't uh, start the problem having to find the solution to end the problem, right?
That's really, really good insight. You shouldn't have to find the solution. I absolutely agree with that. I do feel silly now. I had planned my next question was asking, are there any resources or books that you would suggest so that we're not relying on their friends? White people need to educate themselves, but I just also want to know that you guys have resources that you have seen and appreciated. Are there any that you would like to share out? I appreciate Carvel saying tryingtogether.org, and I will compile these and put them out in a little PDF for our teachers to access on our website. You do not have to share anything. You can say just Google it. But if there are any resources that you really enjoyed, feel free to share those out.
Yeah, I'll share some. So I don't know if you have a membership with NACCE, but if you don't, I can always forward any and all webinars and YouTube videos. We do a lot of training with the schools that I work with, because a lot of them are low income schools. A lot of them are schools of multiple ethnicities all in one, multiple languages. So we keep ourselves as fresh as possible on what's going on. So NACCE is a good one. I think sometimes TS Gold, I don't know what your lesson plan platform is right now, but sometimes they send out videos. Also, the DHS websites sometimes have access to free webinars, and then if there's any of them on there that are not free, my job normally pays for my education, so I can forward all those to you. I have tons of resources.
That is so wonderful. I appreciate your generosity in sharing those out. We will have to talk and maybe compile some of those to share out. I really appreciate that. One book that I am curious about, I shadowed a principal in my master's program, and she highly suggested the book "Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria?" Um, I learned a lot from it, and I really appreciated it. Are there any seconds on that, or is that a book that we would recommend to white educators as a starting jumping off point, maybe in the classroom to educate?
I think that's a good book to definitely start with. And it's funny that you mentioned that book. One of my colleagues, he had talked about it because he actually experienced it. And when he saw it in action, he understood, wow, I just read this book and I see it happening. They had with the Katrina families that moved up here to Oklahoma, and he had a student that came to his school, and he was going around, because he was, excited to be able to, support the students. And when he brought the student to the cafeteria, the student was searching and was looking and looking and looking, and he realized, I know what he's looking for, and I don't have it here. And so, yes, I definitely, but he understood. And I think that's a great book to start. And there are several others, you can Google it and you will find several. But for those educators, one that I follow, if there's any, especially that are administrators, I love Principal Kafele. He, yes, I love Principal Kafele. It's like a one-stop shop. You can go there and get, book lists. He does videos for free. So there's a plethora of information there to help an administrator, to help a teacher, to get you going, to get you to do your research. And then he also lists several books. He's always talking about several books that you can read to help you on your journey.
I really appreciate that. It sounds like Principal Kafele has a lot of resources there that we can go look into and continue sharing out on our Operation Engagement platform. I really appreciate that. I was looking for one other thing as a resource that I really wanted to share about. This year, the OSU Writing Project, Oklahoma State University Writing Project, it's a teacher professional development opportunity, and it is an incredible opportunity. This year, they are doing the whole program in Tulsa, in the Greenwood district, focusing on the 100-year anniversary of all of the Tulsa Race Massacre history that we have really started uncovering. I was so privileged to be a part of the 2020 group or 2019 group. And I can't say enough how much I appreciated all of the different voices that they bring in to share during Oklahoma State University Writing Project. If you would like any information on any of that, I would be so happy to share. Our professional development committee chair for Operation Engagement is actually the director of it. She is an incredible person and has so much information to share. Oh, there she is. She's doing a little shout out there. I love it. But that will be such an incredible opportunity. Dr. Shanidra now at OSU is always such an incredible voice in all of the learning that happens surrounding that. And it doesn't just center around that, it just focuses on social justice in today's world. And it is such an incredible opportunity. So I would love to share more about that. And we'll be sharing about that on our social media pages. Our next guiding point here is probably a really big topic. And I understand that we cannot tackle this all tonight, but it is something that is kind of turned into a buzzword in education, and I've heard it a lot, being an ally. So we hear being an ally for all students who are marginalized. We hear it for our LGBTQ students. We hear it for our students of minorities. And I just want to know your advice to educators on steps toward being an ally to students of color in your classroom and making them feel loved and seen and connected in your classroom. So what does being an ally look like in the classroom?
Well, I think what it looks like in the classroom, you basically said it is making sure all of your students feel loved, accepted, appreciated, like they have a place in your room, in your community. I know my school is pre-K through third grade, and I know Samantha pre-K through third grade. And that's one of the things at our Laura Elementary we strive to do. And we do a good job of that, of making sure all of our students, feel like they have a safe place. Because if they have a safe place, learning can happen. Learning can happen when kiddos know that they're not going to be bullied, or they're not going to be made fun of because of, whether it's their skin color or their economic status. But that's our responsibility to do that as educators. And we have to be intentional on that, setting the tone in the classroom, setting even the tone with the parents, because it's not like a child was born with these attitudes and mindsets. It's because it was taught to them. And so we have to do some reteaching sometimes. And sometimes it's difficult because we realize when we meet the parent, oh, wow, you're really where I need to start with. But we have to make sure our classrooms are welcoming. And it can start with as simple as literature, making sure there are books in your classroom that look like the students in your classroom. Making sure that even in the library, our librarians do a great job of making sure that there are books that represent our population. I have a high population of Spanish speaking students. So we make sure that we have books that are in Spanish, books that are about, the history, so that when they go, they can check out a book with someone that looks like them. Right. And so we have to be intentional on that. And we have to make sure that we have zero tolerance for those type of negative attitudes, that if they do come up, like I think someone mentioned in the comments, that's the perfect time that we need to have these conversations, why it's not acceptable, or why even you felt comfortable, just talking like that, or being mean to your friend. But basically it's like we're teaching, we have to be good human beings. And as educators, we have a responsibility. We have a responsibility to do that. And we've been silent for too long. And it's time for us to, speak up, take our power back. I mean, I remember back in the day, those teachers that, didn't play, we're not doing that in this classroom. And so we have to get back to that. We have to get back to where our kids are excited to come to school and love being in our classrooms, because they know that they are welcome and that they don't have to be afraid of, wow, they're talking about Martin Luther King Day. So I guess I guess I better be ready. Everybody's going to look at me. And that still does happen. You know, my daughter has experienced that. Whenever they talk about slavery, they all turn and look at her because she's the only African-American person in the room, as if, like Shantae said, okay, I'm the only one that's going to speak on this subject. So it's our job as educators.
I think what you said was really, really good. Just like a little piece of that. We never know what's happening at home and what's being said and what they're being taught. And so it's so important as a mom to send my children to a place that I know that they'll be loved. And even, you know, even when I was a student going to school, I know those teachers that I was so close to, and I was so excited to see them. And I think that's really, really important.
I really appreciate you guys sharing on that topic. I know that we could have an entire panel on what that looks like, but I really appreciate you guys sharing out just a little bit of information on just, especially the classroom community piece of that, and how, when it all boils down to it, is very simple. Deidre said, be a good human being, and that we get to share kindness, love, and empathy and model that for our students every day through conversations. And I loved what you said about literature. It starts with something as small as, we talked about books as mirrors where people can see themselves, and books as windows where people can see into other people's lives and understand. So it benefits every student in the classroom to have literature where the main characters look different than them. And I really appreciate you bringing that up as an incredible point for something that's so simple. Just one trip to the Scholastic book sale, and you can make those dreams come true. Wanting to be respectful of everyone's time, I want to finish it on just hopes for students in today's world. Just a moment for those of you who are parents, and to share, for those of you who are educators, to share what you hope to see in schools moving forward. And just for all of our panel members, no matter what background you come from or where you're at right now, to share what you hope for kids, and why this work is so important, and why these conversations have to come from an educated and real place, and not just, like we said at the beginning, that just the one picture book that goes back on the shelf at the end of the month and the worksheet with Martin Luther King's face in the corner. I think, what are our hopes for our students? What is that message of hope that we're sending out to educators to end this panel?
I think I'll go ahead and say that, you know, we're at a defining moment in the history of this country, whether we realize it or not. You know, these moments that we are experiencing right now are going to be in textbooks one day, and future generations are going to look back and, you know, say, did that really happen? You know, so we have a chance to really shape who we want to be moving forward, and normalizing race relations and stomping out racism to where it doesn't exist anywhere. And if anybody feels the need to be that way, they are, you know, shunned essentially, right? They don't feel like they have a place to stay. So my hope, I guess, is that, you know, teachers like yourself and everybody else that is passionate about this, that you continue, you know, educating and continue reaching out, you know, continuing being a beacon of hope for, you know, somebody that's soon to be a parent, that, you know, hey, there are going to be great teachers out there that have my child's best interest in mind. And I know they're going to try to do their best job every day to make sure that they feel welcome and normal, not a token by any means, by being in their classroom. So
That's great.
That's my hope. My hope is that we won't have to have discussions on how we're going to discuss, you know, race, or how we're going to discuss celebrating the history and culture of different ethnic groups. You know, it's my hope that as educators, we will, you know, be united, and we will stand strong on helping to, you know, empower our young people to be able to think for themselves and problem solve and be able to, not be afraid to speak out and to, stand up for someone else that doesn't look like them. So, that's my goal, is that, when kiddos hear something, they'll think, and I think someone mentioned it, like, that's not what my teacher taught me. Or when they talk about, when they hear these conversations of people of color and there are, stereotyping them, and they're like, no, that's not right. That's not true. That they'll speak out, and then we will begin to see, like Mr. Montgomery said, we're going to stamp out these attitudes and mindsets. So as educators, we have a responsibility to make sure that we set that environment where it can happen, and and to also support. I love the work that Ms. Chanel is doing, and that we also find opportunities where our kids can do some civic work. There's work that our kids can do, to help them, show that, it wasn't just Dr. King. There are things that young people can do too, but it's going to take us as educators to show our kids how they can do that. So that's my hope.
I love it. Thank you so much for sharing.
I was just going to say, I hope we can move away from a constant defend and a more uplift. Because I feel like right now we're going against the grain always, always, always. And I want to see more embracement of differences, and not just with race and ethnicity, with LGBT and just people who represent themselves differently. I want to see, and I hope to see, more uplifting of that. People seeing positives in it and not fighting the negatives.
I like to piggyback off of that. This summer when George Floyd was murdered, and we had the peaceful protest on the east side with Black Lives Matter, I went with my dad, and my dad is a Vietnam vet, and we were out there, and we, vast people on the east side of Oklahoma City. We had white people, Mexican people, Native American people, LGBTQ. Like, it was a beautiful day, sunny, bright, nice weather. Everybody came together for this cause. And to see that on the east side of Oklahoma City was a beautiful experience. And I was with my dad. And I looked at him and I said, Dad, how do you feel that you went to Vietnam to fight a war and you came back and you fought over here for social justice issues, and 30 to 40 years later, you're 72 and I'm 39 years old, and we're still fighting the same things that you fought, that I wouldn't have to experience that I'm currently experiencing. And so I hope for the kiddos is that things that I'm doing in the community now, that things that you are doing in the community now, educating students, that 30, 40, 50 years from now, they will not experience this. He said to me that, when I asked him that question, he was like, I did not go to Vietnam for this. I hope that when I went to Vietnam and I came back, that this would be over and that you wouldn't have to experience it. So that is my hope and my wish for future generations in America and across the world, that what we experience now, what we have been experiencing, that's eradicated, and the kids won't experience it, and that they'll have love and just acceptance of everybody.
Absolutely.
That's just my final thought.
Thank you so much for sharing.
Yes, thank you for sharing that. That like gave me goosebumps. I always tell my son and my family and my kids at school that you have to speak life into each other. And one thing, to answer your question, is sending my son to school, I expect that to happen to him. I expect people to speak into him, and I know it's not always going to happen. It's terrible, but there's hate in the world. But if I can make the change in my home, then maybe I'm getting just somewhere. But it's just so important, like, to know that sending him to school, that he's going to have teachers speaking life into him and making a difference and acknowledging the things that, are happening in his life, and things that are happening in the world, and just to go off of one of the questions about like educating, ourselves, that's so important, because you're going to have kids that come to you and want to talk to you about, certain things, and you need to know what's happening and how to handle it, I guess. But anyways.
Well, you guys have given me a piece of hope today, just in sharing your voice and just being so generous with the amount of time that you've given away this evening to help educators in their classrooms to further understand and hopefully to be inspired to educate themselves and to be sparked. We need people with fires lit underneath them to make change. I remember sitting in my NLC interview, and Shantae specifically said to me, how are you going to use your voice to speak for people who don't have a seat at the table? And I think as an educator, that inspired me so much, because I know that I'm sitting in PLC meetings talking about what plans we're going to make coming up soon. I'm sitting in RTI meetings advocating for students who have more than just homework on their minds. And I just appreciate you all being a piece of the education moving forward. I want to use Operation Engagement as a platform to continue these conversations, so that, as Carvel said, they are not just a conversation happening 1 month of the year. In the worksheet downloaded from TPT and being done with it. You all are such incredible people, and I think each one of you for taking the time tonight to share your experiences, to share the knowledge that you have, and to share your hopes for your children and your future children, and for all of the students that we impact in each day that we are working in the education field and in community outreach. So thank each one of you so much. We're right here at an hour. Holy moly, how did it fly by so quickly? I hope that whenever we're able to post this recording, that a lot of people will be able to see it. I cannot wait to share feedback with you all, and I hope to continue working with each of you to continue sharing knowledge and moving this narrative more toward the uplift, as Kyan said to us. So thank you again. I appreciate your time tonight, and wow, we did it. We got through each of those topics and hopefully learned a lot this evening. So with that, I will let each of our presenters go enjoy the rest of their evening and get some rest before they take on another day tomorrow. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Emily.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate each of you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm super proud of you.
Thank you, Sam.
Thank you, Emily.
Being on here tonight. Thank you so much, Carvel, for sharing your voice.
Absolutely.
Thank me.
Thank you so much for being on here tonight, Alyssa.
Proud of you.
I'm so
Proud of you.
Thank you so much, Shantae. You inspire me every day.
Oh, I don't know what I'm doing. Okay, wait. All right. Bye.
Bye.
Okay.